The Earth is in the middle between Mars and Venus, but Venus should not be so hot. It should be warm.
Who served the Soviet Union at its peak.
Imagine for a moment a secret so profound, so utterly world-altering, that it was buried in the cold, dark vaults of the Soviet Union for decades. A truth about our closest planetary neighbor, Venus, that was deliberately hidden from the world. Now, those long-lost Soviet images have finally, chillingly been exposed, and what they reveal has sent an undeniable ripple of panic through the scientific community. Even the reaction from public figures like Joe Rogan when he first heard about these newly declassified photos from Venus says it all. Why are we only seeing this now? These aren't just ordinary photos. With the most recent revelations coming from a late astronaut who served the Soviet Union at its peak, these images originated from forgotten probes launched even before most people alive today were born. And when modern technology, powered by advanced AI, enhances these ancient images, what emerges leaves even hardened space experts speechless. This isn't just about Venus. This is about what might be watching us from a world we thought was dead. This is the terrifying truth that Soviet scientists never wanted to be revealed. Venus was never meant to be forgotten. In the feverish early days of the space race, the Soviet Union didn't just study Venus, they obsessed over it, while America turned its gaze towards the cold, red deserts of Mars. The Soviets poured an unimaginable torrent of resources, cutting-edge technology, and even lives into unlocking the deepest secrets of a planet that almost no one talks about today. But why? From the 1960s through the 1980s, the USSR became the undisputed world leader in Venus exploration. Their planetary program, famously known as the Venera program, was both incredibly ambitious and utterly relentless. They launched over 30 missions to Venus, and while many tragically failed, several broke fundamental records. Venera 7, against all odds, became the first spacecraft to successfully land on another planet and transmit data back to Earth in 1970. Later, Venera 9 and 10 bravely sent back the first stark black and white images of Venus's surface, depicting a nightmarish landscape littered with jagged rocks under a thick, toxic alien sky. But Venus is absolutely no place for life as we understand it. Its surface consistently reaches over 900 degrees Fahrenheit or 475 degrees Celsius, a temperature so extreme it's hot enough to melt lead. Its atmosphere is a suffocating soup of pure carbon dioxide, perpetually cloaked in churning clouds of concentrated sulfuric acid, and the crushing pressure on the surface is an astounding 90 times that of Earth's, almost like being submerged nearly 3,000 feet underwater. Any lander sent to Venus were instantly crushed, melted, and utterly destroyed within minutes, or if lucky, mere hours. In stark contrast, Mars, though cold and barren, was dry, geologically stable, and seemed full of potential. It boasted a thin, manageable atmosphere, no acid rain, and certainly wasn't trying to violently crush or melt anything that dared to touch down. So by the late 1980s, Venus was quietly, collectively abandoned by most of the scientific world. Western countries, especially the US, shifted almost entirely to Mars exploration. NASA's triumphant Viking landers, its iconic Mars rovers, and its orbiters became the undisputed stars of the show. Mars was the future. Venus was deemed a lost cause, a planetary hell not worth the continued impossible struggle. But oddly, the Soviets didn't stop as early as everyone else. Even as their economy weakened and their ambitious space program struggled under immense pressure, they defiantly continued their Venus missions longer than any other country. Their final probe, Vega 2, was launched in 1984, carrying a lander and a balloon specifically designed to study the Venusian atmosphere. Despite the increasingly desperate odds, the Soviets pushed deeper into Venus research than anyone had before, or has since. Why? That's the question that continues to puzzle historians and scientists alike. Was it pure national stubbornness, a fierce sense of national pride, or did they genuinely discover something they didn't want the world to know? This persistent, inexplicable obsession with such an undeniably hostile planet seems profoundly unusual unless the Soviets truly believed it was worth every unimaginable risk. There was something about Venus that kept them coming back, and now, decades later, newly declassified archives chillingly suggest they may have found exactly what they were looking for. The Venera program was largely written off by many as a dead end, but in the shadows of the Cold War, the Soviet Union may have captured something truly extraordinary, something terrifying, and then meticulously buried it. If the Cold War had one defining, pervasive characteristic, it was absolute secrecy. Both the United States and the Soviet Union guarded their scientific and military advancements like priceless state treasures. But while the US often publicized its space triumphs, with grand fanfare, the USSR treated even peaceful scientific discoveries as highly classified assets. Nowhere was that more agonizingly obvious than in their handling of the Venera program, its audacious, relentless mission to conquer the most hostile planet in our solar system, Venus. The Venera program, despite its incredible challenges, was a remarkable display of scientific persistence. Yet Soviet engineers kept sending landers there, each more advanced than the last, knowing full well the infernal conditions they faced. Venera 7 made history in 1970 as the first probe to transmit data from another planet's surface. It survived just 23 agonizing minutes before the unimaginable heat and crushing pressure silenced it forever. But Venera 13 in 1981 changed everything. It landed, endured for over 2 astonishing hours, and sent back something no one expected: full-color images, eerie audio from the surface, and groundbreaking chemical analysis of the Venusian soil. And then, just as quickly, the vast majority of that crucial information vanished. Yes, a few grainy pictures made the rounds globally. Yes, we've all seen the familiar orange-hued rocks under that alien sky, but where was the rest? Where were the complete high-resolution image sets, the detailed environmental scans, the raw, uncompressed files, and the exhaustive telemetry logs? What Western scientists actually received was curated, filtered, and suspiciously incomplete. Metadata was missing. Entire frames were blurred, clumsily cropped, or outright deleted. Unlike NASA, which famously flooded the public with every byte of data from Apollo, Viking, and Voyager missions, the USSR shared only select, carefully chosen results, brief temperature readings, fleeting audio clips, and a mere handful of images. Many critical frames were conspicuously absent. The famous Venera 13 and 14 images, for instance, show wide-angle shots of a rocky surface under a dull orange haze, but experts immediately noticed the contrast was subtly altered. Certain areas were strangely blurred with unnatural shadows, and entire sections of telemetry were conspicuously absent. In some cases, metadata, the vital background information that tells scientists when and how data was captured, was simply missing. In contrast, NASA made it a habit to release almost everything, from the iconic moon landings to Mars rover. Selfies, American space data was considered public domain. Scientists worldwide could analyze the same raw files and debate their meaning. But with the Venera missions, there was always an impenetrable curtain. The USSR released just enough to prove the missions happened and then held absolutely everything else back. They shared just enough to raise far more questions than answers. But why? At the time, some cynically believed it was just Cold War paranoia. Others suspected the data was simply too poor, too corrupted to be useful. But if it was nothing, why hide it? If it was meaningless, why go to such lengths to bury it? Venus is an unforgiving planet, but it's not impossible to study. The fact that the USSR put so much Herculean effort into landing there, and then so meticulously withheld so much, chillingly suggests there might be far more to the story, especially now as newly declassified images begin to surface, revealing strange anomalies that were never part of the official record. Was the Soviet obsession with Venus truly about proving technical superiority, or were they in fact hiding the biggest scientific discovery of the 20th century? Something profound happened, and whatever it was, these newly declassified Soviet photos from Venus bring us one terrifying step closer to the truth. By the 2010s, the Soviet Union had long since collapsed, its vast empire dissolved, but the dense fog of secrecy surrounding its space missions stubbornly lingered. Most of the invaluable data from the Venera program had never been properly archived or widely studied, left to languish, until one determined Russian scientist decided to look much closer. His name was Leonid Ksanfomalidi, a veteran researcher at Russia's Space Research Institute, a man who had worked intimately on planetary imaging for decades. decades. In 2012, Conformality dropped an absolute bombshell after meticulously reanalyzing the images taken by Venera 13, the very probe that had landed on Venus back in 1982. He made an astonishing claim: there were unequivocal signs of movement on the planet's surface, not random shifts, but distinct objects that appeared to change position between frames, despite the lander itself remaining perfectly stationary. Among the shapes he pointed out were three main unsettling anomalies. The first was a disc-shaped object that seemed to mysteriously appear and vanish across different images. The second was a scorpion-shaped form that, in one frame, cast a shadow in one direction, and then inexplicably cast it in another, something that shouldn't happen with a fixed light source and a stationary lander. The third was a flap or mechanical-looking piece that Conformality described as looking like it had shifted location or simply disappeared between frames. Conformality didn't outright declare these objects to be definitive signs of alien life, but he did strongly suggest they were not random. In his own carefully chosen words, the shapes unequivocally exhibited the features of a living organism. These claims, published in a respected, peer-reviewed Russian journal, quickly spread like wildfire across the internet and deep into fringe science circles. Western scientists immediately pushed back, their skepticism palpable. NASA and planetary imaging experts argued that the anomalies were simply artifacts caused by lens flares, digital data glitches, or environmental effects on aging Soviet technology. They noted that Venus has an incredibly thick, toxic atmosphere that could easily distort light, and that the imaging equipment aboard the Venera landers was primitive by modern standards. But some independent analysts weren't so quick to dismiss the claims. A handful of image specialists and UFO researchers pointed out that some shadows in the images appeared to genuinely change direction, which would be incredibly difficult to explain with static objects and a stationary lander. Others noted that certain forms possessed visible outlines and textures, suggesting they weren't just random errors, but possibly physical structures or even living organisms. Even more intriguing was the timing. Conformality's claims came not long after a new wave of scientific interest in Venus began to cautiously emerge, particularly around the tantalizing question of life within its upper atmosphere. While most scientists still treat Conformality's claims with extreme caution or outright skepticism, there's no denying one crucial thing. His analysis reawakened a global curiosity about the long missing pieces of Soviet Venus data. What if the objects he identified weren't glitches, but something far more important, something truly profound? Whether the anomalies were biological, mechanical, or something else entirely remains a mystery that haunts the fringes of science. But Conformality did more than just re-examine old photographs. He cracked open the heavily fortified door the Soviets had decisively shut decades ago, and whatever's still hidden in those enigmatic frames, we haven't seen the last of it. Then, the final chilling piece of the puzzle surfaced, revealing the photos they truly never wanted you to see. In 2023, an unassuming, forgotten archive room in Moscow, long buried under layers of red tape and Soviet dust, unexpectedly yielded a profound mystery. A diligent researcher sifting through mountains of Cold War-era space records stumbled upon a batch of undeclared Soviet photos, astonishingly taken during the very same Venera missions to Venus. These images had never ever appeared in scientific journals, in press briefings, or even in the Soviet Union's own official science reports. They were specifically from the Venera 13 and Venera 14 probes, both of which landed on Venus in 1982. The photos, carefully stored in fragile film canisters, initially showed surface conditions in stark black and white and limited color, mostly the familiar rocks, soil, and Venus's eerie orange-tinted haze. But several frames immediately stood out. Some were clearly blurred or crudely cropped, exhibiting unnatural shadows and conspicuously missing timestamps. A few showed undeniable signs of physical tampering, with distinct scratch marks deliberately obscuring areas that should have contained key visual data. Others had peculiar fog-like patterns near the surface, or odd repeating geometric shapes that simply didn't match any known equipment or debris. Analysts quickly, chillingly suspected intentional censorship. It was as though certain critical details had been meticulously scrubbed or deliberately blocked before these photos ever saw the light of day. When digital experts painstakingly fed these images into modern AI enhancement software, things escalated from strange to truly terrifying. The AI meticulously reconstructed some of the blurred sections and sharpened others. In several frames, an astonishing sight began to emerge: biological-looking textures. They appeared to unequivocally resemble branch-like filaments, distinct cell-like clusters, and ripple patterns that fundamentally didn't align with geological formations. More surprising still was the visual trace of gas emissions that appeared to originate directly from cracks in the ground. Scientists familiar with recent Venus studies immediately noted that the patterns were strangely similar to phosphine emissions, a chemical profoundly associated with microbial life. For decades, the very idea of life on Venus was a dead conversation, dismissed outright. The planet's surface, hot enough to melt lead and perpetually filled with acidic clouds, seemed utterly inhospitable, a biological wasteland. But here were raw, unadulterated Soviet photos from the early 1980s suggesting strange emissions and possibly some form of organic activity, decades before anyone was even seriously considering the possibility. The release of these images profoundly shocked planetary scientists, many of whom had definitively written off Venus as little more than a scientific graveyard. Now they were asking hard, urgent questions. Why were these photos so meticulously hidden for so long? Who made the definitive decision to withhold them? And perhaps most importantly, what exactly did those mysterious emissions truly mean? In planetary science, phosphine does not simply appear out of nowhere. It has to come from somewhere. And when it's coming from the surface of Venus, the implications could be quite simply enormous. This leads us directly to the phosphine puzzle, a groundbreaking clue from Earth's twin. Venus has long been called Earth's twin, eerily similar in size, gravity, and composition, but with one fatal defining difference: it's a planetary hell. Temperatures reach nearly 900 degrees Fahrenheit. The atmosphere is thick with carbon dioxide and perpetually cloaked in swirling sulfuric acid clouds. For decades, this toxic world was universally written off as dead, geologically quiet, and biologically impossible. That widely held belief dramatically changed in 2020. In a surprise, earth-shattering announcement, a team of astronomers led by Jane Greaves at Cardiff University reported something truly shocking. Phosphine gas had been unequivocally detected in Venus's upper atmosphere. On Earth, phosphine is incredibly rare and inherently unstable. It's typically produced by microbes in oxygen-poor environments like swamps or the guts of animals. While it can be made industrially, in nature, its presence is almost always tied directly to life. The scientific community erupted. Some claimed it was an instrument error. Others suggested it could be the result of unknown geological activity or an overlooked chemical process. Still, the detection was too impossible to ignore. If phosphine was truly there and in significant, stable amounts, it might strongly suggest microbial life bravely floating in Venus's acidic clouds. For years, the findings sat in scientific limbo, too wild to definitively confirm, yet too monumental to simply dismiss. Greaves and her team, undeterred, returned with compelling new data from the Atacama Large Millimeter Submillimeter Array in Chile, rigorously backed by space-based observations. Their definitive conclusion: phosphine is real, and it's far more abundant and stable than previously thought. Even more surprising, they detected phosphine not just in the upper atmosphere, but in deeper layers, with concentrations that remained eerily steady over time. That stability meant it wasn't a transient event, a fleeting anomaly. Quite possibly something alive was actively producing it. That's when things got even stranger, and scientists began to connect the most terrifying dots. Of the recently declassified Soviet photographs, quietly released from that Moscow archive in 2023, showed what appeared to be a low-lying haze near the Venusian surface. For decades, this visual had been dismissed as mere heat distortion or random camera noise. But when modern researchers enhanced the image and revisited the original mission's telemetry logs, they noticed something truly strange, something chillingly familiar. One of the lander's infrared readings, captured during the very same frame, showed an unmistakable spike in absorption at wavelengths now definitively associated with phosphine. At the time, back in 1982, this was simply dismissed as noise or interference. But with modern spectral libraries and advanced gas models, the pattern lined up almost perfectly with what we now consider a definitive phosphine signature. Combined with the strange visual haze in the photo, the correlation was impossible to ignore. It starkly suggested that Venera may have not only captured an unexplained atmospheric anomaly, it may have recorded the definitive chemical footprint of life nearly 4 decades ago. Here's where it becomes truly chilling. The Soviets never published this critical image. It wasn't included in any Venera mission report. The photo was deliberately archived with missing metadata, with suspicious scratches obscuring key sections, and with absolutely no record of follow-up analysis. It looked less like a discarded, useless frame and more like something intentionally buried. Did the USSR detect phosphine before anyone else? And if so, why didn't they say anything? Was it fear of global panic, or did they suspect something? Even more terrifying, that life was hiding in the most extreme, unimaginable corner of the solar system, and it simply wasn't ready to be found, not by humanity. The undeniable connection between modern science and long-forgotten Soviet data is now impossible to ignore. What the West tentatively rediscovered in 2020 and definitively confirmed in 2024 may have already been captured directly by a Soviet lander in 1982. Unlike distant telescopes scanning clouds from millions of miles away, the Soviets had mechanical boots on the ground. They didn't just detect phosphine from afar. They may have horrifyingly photographed it seeping from the very rocks beneath their feet. Now, as experts revisit the photos, data logs, and mission records, one disturbing possibility grows louder and louder. We've had irrefutable signs of life on Venus for decades, and someone, somewhere, decided we simply weren't ready to know. This realization, the unequivocal discovery of possible microbial life on Venus, has not sparked the widespread excitement one might expect. Instead, it has triggered profound unease, even outright fear, within the scientific community. At the SETI Institute, one researcher summarized the pervasive mood bluntly: "We weren't just wrong, we missed it. And now we have to ask what else we've missed." That precisely is the true source of the panic, not just the existence of life itself, but the staggering implications of such a monumental oversight. For decades, Venus was categorically dismissed as uninhabitable. The new undeniable findings suggest that life can in fact exist in conditions previously thought utterly impossible: unimaginable heat, crushing pressure, and highly acidic atmospheres. That alone upends foundational assumptions about where life can truly thrive, ripping up textbooks and challenging generations of scientific thought. But the panic deepens dramatically with the chilling realization that this irrefutable evidence was deliberately buried for 40 years. If microbial biosignatures were demonstrably overlooked, or even more unsettlingly suppressed in the Venera data, it raises grave concerns about how scientific institutions, often shaped by political agendas and entrenched assumptions, may have fundamentally failed humanity. Already, NASA, the European Space Agency, ESA, and Roscosmos have begun urgent early discussions about the unprecedented necessity of returning to Venus. Proposed missions range from advanced atmospheric probes and rugged robotic landers to sophisticated orbiters equipped with AI-driven chemical sensors. But a new, terrifying concern now looms large: contamination. If there's an active, thriving microbial ecosystem on Venus, introducing Earth-based microbes even inadvertently could irrevocably corrupt or erase it, skewing vital results, or worse, destroying the very life we've just found. And vice versa, Venusian microbes, brought back unknowingly, could interact unpredictably, perhaps catastrophically, with Earth's delicate biosphere. The existing protocols for planetary protection were never designed for a discovery this close, this extreme, or this profoundly ambiguous. To many researchers, the biggest, most visceral fear isn't life itself. It's that we already found it decades ago and either utterly failed to recognize or, more terrifyingly, actively chose not to admit what we were seeing. The idea that alien life has been quietly surviving next door, unnoticed or intentionally suppressed, is a crushing blow to scientific confidence, creating a sense of profound betrayal and spreading widespread panic. And as that panic spreads, the haunting questions mount. Who made the definitive call to suppress this vital data? Why weren't these photos reanalyzed sooner, decades ago? And if we got Venus so spectacularly wrong, what else out there in the vast, silent cosmos have we missed? This isn't just a scientific turning point, it's a fundamental reckoning for humanity. So what happens now? In the coming months, this world-shattering revelation will likely remain tightly under wraps, shared only within intensely controlled scientific and political circles. The public won't see the full, raw images or hear the unfiltered reports. Deep-seated fears of mass panic, widespread misinformation, and profound geopolitical fallout will almost certainly keep the data classified, or at best, slowly trickled out through carefully curated academic papers. Governments will act decisively before they dare to speak publicly. Behind closed doors, the US, the European Space Agency, and India will likely accelerate their respective Venus mission timelines with unprecedented urgency. NASA's long-delayed Veritas mission will probably regain critical funding and a renewed sense of urgency. ESA's Envision, originally focused on mapping Venusian geology, may now be swiftly tasked with a direct, dedicated search for biosignatures. India's ambitious space agency, already hinting at interest in Venus, could fast-track its Chakrayan-1 orbiter, aiming for launch within the next few short years. Meanwhile, Russia, the alleged original holder of the suppressed data, may see this as a rare, golden opportunity to reclaim significant scientific prestige and perhaps atone for its decades of chilling silence. After years of declining space influence, the Kremlin could aggressively revive a Venera-style program, brazenly branding itself as the first nation to discover alien life, even if it never announced it at the time. A renewed Venus initiative could easily become a powerful political tool, strategically repositioning Russia at the forefront of planetary science, an unexpected return to Cold War-era space dominance. Private space companies, always hungry for the next frontier, won't sit idly by either. SpaceX, Rocket Lab, and other ambitious ventures will likely propose radical deep atmosphere drones and high-pressure landers specifically designed to reach areas of Venus that are far too extreme for traditional hardware. These ventures may frame themselves not just as technological pioneers, but as the first non-government explorers in the historic search for alien life. But amidst all the political shifts and technological proposals, the scientific world faces a much deeper, more profound philosophical and ethical crossroads. Venus, once definitively dismissed as a planetary inferno, may now be treated as a genuinely living world, sparking fierce, urgent debates about contamination, access, and the very moral limits of human exploration. Expect heated arguments over planetary protection, data transparency, and whether international cooperation can truly withstand intense national agendas and the lure of individual glory. Beyond all of this, the public will inevitably begin asking deeper, more unsettling questions. If life can survive the unimaginable crushing pressure, the scorching heat, and the corrosive acidic clouds of Venus, where else in the vast, silent cosmos could it possibly be hiding? Beneath the icy crust of Europa, in the methane haze of Titan, in the red dust of Mars. And then comes the final, haunting thought that chills us to the bone. If life has been clinging to Venus all along, utterly unconcerned by humanity's limited perceptions, is there something else out there, perhaps, looking for us, just as tirelessly as we've been looking for them? The answers won't come quickly, but the race to find them is only just beginning. What do you think about these declassified photos and the secrets they held?